Hello, everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining. I'm Gleb Bahmutov, VP of Engineering at Cypress.io. You can find me on Twitter, you can find me on GitHub, you can find my personal site. And I'm here to talk about something else, not about testing, not about JavaScript code. We'll kind of look at JavaScript code, but my main point today is to talk about documentation search, right? And how to make a good documentation search using Algolia. Before we do that, I'll start how I usually start with a warning. So right now we are in a huge climate crisis. If you read Guardian this week, you'll find that the Arctic is not freezing over like it used to. That the methane that sits right now frozen is actually started bubbling. And we are pretty much on course to 3.5 Celsius degrees. But if methane starts melting, it's a runaway reaction, which causes 5, maybe 10 degrees Celsius average rise. So everything we do will have to stop. All JavaScript, all coding jobs will fight for survival. Good thing is that we can actually stop it, but we have to act. We cannot delay it anymore. You can change your life, eat less meat, don't fly, but the most important is to join an organization. So in London, Extinction Rebellion is huge, but find organization and just start acting. That's all I'm asking. Okay, a little bit to a better topic. So in this talk, I'll talk about the documentation and how important it is to the funnel of users in your organization. I'll show a couple of examples how I set up documentation search, and then I'll share a couple of tips and answer any questions at the end. Okay, let's go. So imagine you work at a company, you sell software, right? It could be something users install, something maybe they use online. So there's always a funnel. And a funnel is how you lose customers. The funnel looks kind of like this. At the top, you have first-time visitors, people just checking it out. Maybe they heard the name of your company, maybe they found a tweet about you, maybe someone mentioned them. So they come and they take a look just to figure out what are you doing, if they can use it. Just a percentage of those visitors will actually say, yeah, this looks interesting, let me try it. So these are first-time users. After a while, some of those first-time users will be converted to repeat users. You like the product, you use it again and again. And what we're trying to do, right, is we're trying to convert users to paying users. But we, of course, will lose a couple of them. And the most important are promoters. So these are heavy users who actually pay for the product, but they also recommend the product to someone else, right? And they actually allow you to get more customers. So the best case scenario, right? Even if you write awesome thing, right? It's probably 10, 20% of first-time users will be converted to paying customers. It's a ridiculously small percentage. So imagine that you convert all first-time visitors or first-time users into paying customers. Imagine what it will do to your revenue, right? It will blow you out of water because you'll convert to 5, maybe 10 times the revenue. Imagine what it will do to your company. Unfortunately, you always lose people through this funnel, right? They're dropping out. So I kind of think about people and why they drop out in 2 ways. So for example, first-time visitor comes in, says, this tool doesn't do what I need, maybe doesn't work on my operating system. So I consider those valid reasons. Yeah, it's fine to lose people who cannot run your tool. But maybe a user drops out because they say, this tool doesn't do what I need, but it does. Does not work on my platform, but it does work on their platform. So I consider those the wrong reasons to drop out. Let's say you're trying to say, this tool doesn't run on CI. Okay, yeah, it doesn't run. But imagine they drop out because they don't know how to set it up to run on CI. So that's a wrong reason for dropping out. Imagine a user says, your tool is great, tried it, love it, cannot afford it. That's a valid reason for dropout. But if a user drops out saying, I don't know what value it gives me, I don't know how to justify your price. That's absolutely the wrong reason. Finally, maybe someone says, I'm happy. I'm not recommending to anyone, but it works for me. Okay, fine. But maybe they don't recommend it to someone who asked because they didn't know it was possible to do. So that's a wrong reason. So kind of a valid reasons are, it's your market fit. Maybe you should pivot a little bit and add a feature. Maybe you should fix some bugs. This is absolutely, the green area. That's our day-to-day work, right? We identify maybe a feature that people want to pay for. We implement it. No problem. But on the left, these are all the reasons that you lose customers that you could actually keep and convert. Bad user interface, bad documentation, lack of examples, all the wrong reasons for potential customers dropping out. So our goal is to drive that like red area or orange area to 0, because then we'll get so much more revenue because we'll stop dropping these people out from our funnel. So imagine if you get twice as many people going all the way from first-time visitors all the way down to paying customers or promoters, your revenue will increase n times, not like percentage, but n times. So another point where I think is very important, if you compare how hard it is for you to work on features and bugs compared to how hard it is to actually do better documentation and more examples, it is so much easier to write documentation for things you already have. It's hard to write a new product. It's easy to have a nice guide that works for. So how do you create better documentation so you don't lose customers through a funnel? Well, you just don't start blindly writing more documentation. You think about the users and you kind of create a couple personas. So for example, a persona could be a first-time visitor, right? Maybe what kind of question do they want answered by your documentation? What does this service do? How does it work? Will it work for me? So you want to answer those questions. The trick there is to put like hello world example first in your documentation so that users immediately understand what the tool does, how great the tool is, so they don't drop out because they don't understand what's going on. Imagine first-time user, not a visitor, but the user. Well, they might want to ask a couple specific questions. Does it do X? How does it do Y? So in that case, you probably want more examples under or after hello world, kind of showing basic use cases. You don't want the user to kind of give up after trying the first time. Another user persona could be a repeat user. They want to know how to do specific things, how to solve errors, right? In that case, you have to write more examples. So after a couple of inline, you want to give links to all potential use cases of your software that you foresee people hitting. A repeat visitor, same questions, but wants training, wants to be efficient, right? Is there support available? So, you probably want to create more complicated recipe, not just individual kind of how to do X examples. Finally, promoters, the people who recommend things, the people who love your tool, you probably want to push updates, tell them what's coming up, the roadmap, and so on. The point is, your documentation will keep growing, right? In our, like we do test runner, just the index is painful to watch, right? Because it keeps expanding and expanding. But the worst thing about creating a lot of documentation is that when you go back to our support channel, like the online chat channel, and you look at that, you start crying because you see all these questions where you're like, how come it's a question? Like, I know it can do it, right? Every question that you see in your support channel, that is a failure. It's a failure of your docs. And that failure means you either have support where you have to yourself answer it, which costs money, or you're potentially losing a customer, which again is a huge money living on the table. I kind of like to measure that percentage, kind of look at all the questions across all support things, all right? Like your GitHub issues, your chat channel. Find all the questions, then look at the questions that you think your documentation answers like right now, and look at this as a percentage. Because then you can say, okay, if I have less than 50% of those questions answered by my documentation, I just have to write more documentation, right? But if it's above 50, that means that you wrote documentation, you have it. It's just users cannot find it, right? And the trick is that you want the users to answer their own questions by themselves, like finding how to do things, not you answering, because that doesn't scale. Unfortunately, good documentation that answers everyone's questions is very hard. And I think it's hard because it's all contradictory. All those personas, right? Like imagine first-time user versus repeat user versus power user, they have completely different questions. So if you try to organize your documentation focused on particular persona, you're going to fail, right? Like what do you put first, right? Easy. Always optimize for beginners, for hello world, right? That's your first question. Because for every, there are 10 like beginners, 10 first-time users compared to one advanced user. And every advanced user used to be a beginner who successfully was converted. So always optimize at the top of the funnel. That's where like the number of potential users is the highest. Okay, for everything else, put documentation, maybe have some structure. Don't worry about much. But what you can do next is make sure that your documentation search is really, really good. Like I'm searching here, like things interesting to beginners, things to more advanced, maybe advanced users. The search finds everything. So another thing that I can recommend is don't answer support questions, right? Don't go to your support channel and start answering things. Instead, and especially for private repos, because that is one single operation. Nobody benefits it but one user. Instead, every time you see a question, update your documentation, answer with a link, so that everyone after that user benefits from your work. So that's just my thing. That's what your support team should be doing. They should be automating themselves or writing themselves out of existence. So I talk about documentation, kind of my view of a value. Let's see how we can set up a search. So I have this example. It's a small little website with a couple pages. I can use search. Let's say I want to search for maybe, right? And it finds maybe because it's right here. If I search for about, it finds about page and about on the main page because I have both. Great. Just a little, kind of static site. The question you might ask yourself is, well, a majority of frameworks, right? They kind of have this like search widget already built in, like ViewPress has it. All of those client-side widgets, they're very, very simple. They just index H1, H2 headers. So, for example, in this case, by using this client-side thing, client-side organization search, it only finds about on the second page. It doesn't find the text about on the first page. So they're a lot more primitive and do not work long-term. So the thing that really kind of I like using is Algolia. And it's not, I'm not affiliated, completely outside company. But you notice that most of the JavaScript projects are using Algolia. It's actually unbelievable, right? They give you free resources. So it's nice, but it's unbelievable. They got like 90% search market right now, which is quite huge, especially considering Google completely missed the boat there. So I came to kind of like look at Algolia as like when I searched Vue.js documentation. I'm like, oh, this works so well. So how do I do it myself? Okay, so here's how we do it. You create Algolia app. They have a free plan. You can start using it for your sites like right away. You create an application. Then inside the application, you create a search index. That's where all those records will be stored. So when you search, it will find a record, return it, which will link to a particular part on your page. So after every deploy, you scrape the site, create the record, and then you'll just use some search widget that will go to that index, find relevant information, and Algolia runs the backend service. So every time you scrape a site, you recreate the whole index. because you recreate the whole website, right? So it completely blows away existing index, creates you a new one. So when you create Algolia app, it creates a couple of API keys. So if you want to scrape, that means add new records, because it blows away previous search index, but puts new records, you need application ID and the private admin API key. So keep those secrets. Otherwise, someone can just destroy or inject bad information. If you want to search, you just need the public search API key. That's just read-only key, so you're safe. That's what you put on your website. So scraping a site is pretty simple. You just need the URL, and all the records will go into the index on Algolia. You have to actually look at the structure of your web page and see how do you, like, where is the main content that you want to scrape? Does it have specific article? Does it, what's the structure? What's more important, H1? Is there like H2 or H3, right? So once you know the structure of your documentation, you create a JSON file. That's Algolia config file, where you have different levels, LV level 0, level 1, from most important to least important. So when you search for, let's say, something and it matches level 0, that's the most important page. Like result, it will return. If it's just somewhere in a text of my document, that will be the text level, which is the lowest level. Okay, so you create this, and then to actually scrape it, you just run a Docker image that Algolia provides. You put your application and API keys, and you say, go. And it will go, and it actually runs a Selenium scraper, traverses all the pages that it can reach, and returns all the records. So for each page, it will say, found 8 different records and 3 records. So that's it. It creates the index. It runs very quickly. If you want to search, for example, on ViewPress, there is a built-in widget. You provide the search API key and index name and API app ID, and that's it. So now, when you search, you will see that Algolia widget creates all the markup. And when you search, you will actually see all those queries going on, right? And hitting the Algolia server. And you can look at the response. It's literally be like JSON objects, JSON records, from most important to least important. Okay, but that's the simple side. Imagine you have documentation side, and you also have a blog that has technical content, and maybe you have more examples, maybe some secondary side with just examples. In that case, take that Algolia config file, right? And you can define multiple starting URLs. So you can start scraping the main site, your secondary site, and a blog. And you can give different selectors so that you can define different selectors for each site. And you look at HTML in each one, and you say, okay, on my main site, these are the selectors and elements in this particular hierarchy. On my, blog, completely different ones. So it will scrape each site differently. And the scraping is pretty fast. So our large documentation site plus blog plus everything, 21,000 different blocks of text, only took exactly 2 minutes. So it's pretty fast to run after each deploy. And then, it just works. And this video shows that it finds something on our documentation, and another hit result is from our example site. So it actually finds things from multiple sources, and you can define which one is more important and priority of each source of information. So that we always display main documentation first and maybe the blog second. Okay. So I described what this index is, how it works, a couple of tips. So because we are developers, we want to make sure that our code is searchable. And Algolia documentation tells you that you should not scrape blocks of code, right? Because it doesn't know what to do, right? Algolia is optimized for natural text, It doesn't know how to parse tokens and create AST and do all the types and so on. So everything that Greg said, like for Algolia, is like completely is beyond its understanding. So what I've done myself, because we have a lot of examples, in my examples, I use a lot of comments because they do provide valuable information about what each code sample does. So what I've done in my Algolia scraping thing is that I actually allowed it to scrape just the comment lines, not anything else, but just the comments. And the way it works is that if I look at the structure of my page, when I create the static site, before it gets scraped, the page is static, and the page is all the code examples are syntax highlighted. That means that they are tokenized, and like a variable, comment, everything has its own class, because that class is used to properly attach CSS with different colors. So for example, in this case, the comment would have a class comment because that's what it shows up as gray. So I know that my comments have a specific selector. And so what I've done in my Algolia config is that I defined the selectors for H1 level, H2, like least important, and so on. And all the way at the bottom, I have a text selector. Like this is the main thing, like the text on your site, that's not H1 or H2, like not the heading. And so usually that would be HTML tag for a paragraph P, for example. So what I've done, I just added comma, and I added class comment. So it will take both paragraphs and the code comments together, right? And so my Algolia will actually scrape it and will consider the code comments as well during scraping. What you can do when you're actually defining this, you can open your browser and you can take that selector, because it's a normal CSS selector, and you can just copy paste it into your DevTools and use double $, which is like query selector all, and then it will give you all elements matching that selector. So you can see on this page what are all the elements that Algolia will consider and scrape. So you can see how I hover, and actually has like the P block, the comment block. So it will actually grab those, and each one of those will become a record in its index. And that means it's searchable, right? And it works out very well, because then it encourages you to actually explain everything in your code examples using comments, and the users benefit from that. Because when they search for something for like a regular expression, it will be found as I don't show here, but they'll be found. The second thing that I think is extremely important, so you should look at your support channels once in a while, your chat, your GitHub issues, your private support, and you should look at the questions that people ask. And if you see a lot of questions, right, that are answered by your documentation, but people still ask them, that means that your search is bad, right? People don't find it, or they don't even know that they can find it, right? Sometimes your search box is hidden somewhere and people have no idea that it actually is that useful. So sometimes you will have those queries, right? Like in this case, have.txt, that have no results. So Algolia just says, no results found, I give up. The interesting thing, on a free Algolia plan, you will just get an email once a week, right, that will say, out of all queries that users entered, 40% had no results. And this is really important. That means people, you have users, they came into your documentation site, try to find an answer, and fail. You had nothing. And Algolia actually tells you all the queries, right? So in this case, the user search for have.txt and stubby, things for testing. If you had paid Algolia plan, you could actually go in real time and see it like right there on that dashboard, and you could understand it in detail right away. But even for free plan, they actually tell you those queries. So what do? You go back and you write documentation for those queries so they no longer are empty, because right, this is what people are searching for. But if they don't find it, they either give up right away or lower their opinion of your documentation and software, or they ask privately or for support, right, in a support channel, and that costs money to answer. So I find it extremely easy. Just look at the questions that people search for and fill the gaps in your documentation. Another thing that I want to finish with just tips and tricks. Algolia is not just a website widget, right? Algolia is the indexing service, most of all, and very fast API. So you can take the same API key, right, and the same application ID, which are public, and you can execute those queries that search Algolia, and they have npm library. You can execute it yourself from any client, right? Which means that, for example, for my job, I built a node terminal documentation searcher. So you can use it even without installing it. You start running it, and then just type text as you would normally search on a website, and it shows all the found hits with URLs, and you just select in a terminal the one that you think you want to see, and it opens your browser at that URL. Pretty straightforward, right? And allows you to quickly find documentation. Now, I haven't explored it more, but I think I would love to have those search widgets to be built into our support channel, in our Salesforce, right? And things like that. It's extremely straightforward to access the index and search it, because they've done the hard part of scraping, right, and organizing your information. Okay, so I want to finish my documentation with, again, reiterating that good documentation is essential to the success of your project and the company, right? Open source and commercial products, they live and die by how well people can use them. And it's hard to write a software that has no bugs, has all the features so obvious that users are never stuck, never feel silly, I would say, using it. So they'll go to your documentation, trying to understand how to use it, what to do, what else it can do. If you don't have answers, you're losing, right? Famous example in front-end world, AngularJS had famously bad documentation. Vue.js came in with extremely good documentation from day one. And people were like absolutely blown away and really like, yeah, I picked Vue, documentation. Like, that's it. Right? So as I kind of explained in my view of documentation and how to set up personas and organize documentation focused on each persona, it's hard, right? And it's often contradictory. So I don't think you can create perfect website where every user who comes in can see their question answered right away, or even find the answers, like just by looking at index, right? So it might be impossible to create organization. Luckily, the search allows us to bypass that question and allow any user at any level, if they can come in and use the search, they can find the information. And I think with Algolia, even with pretty simple setup, I didn't configure anything else. I did not configure, keywords, aliases, synonyms, nothing. Just straight out of the box things. Just select the structure of my document. It turned out to be pretty simple, and I would say much better than what we had before, or much better than I expected. And now whenever I see a support channel, right, question, I go and I use the search, And when I see the result, I just maybe do a screenshot of my search box and the result, and I answer. Not even with a link, but with a search box screenshot, kind of trying to teach the user, you could find the answer to your question by searching. And I hope, that then the users can find all answers in the future. Perfect. So you can find the slides online. I have a blog post explaining how I set up the search and the scraping for this simple website. So you can do that. Documentation, but you can see my kind of approach to Cypress in action yourself and kind of try it out. And Algolia has a lot of documentation and very good and maybe somewhat even scary documentation search themselves. So just check it out. They explain everything very well. Again, in London and Great Britain, join Rebel and Global, because that stuff is the most important thing right now. And if you want to ask me a question, or if you really set up a very good documentation site and you set up documentation scraping and you see the difference, let me know. Like I'm looking for more, I would say, I want to suffer from confirmation bias. So if you're successful, let me know. If you're not, don't let me know. Okay, don't tell me. So I'm on Twitter at Bahmutov. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time. Thank you for joining.